Cartridge, or 357 here. As I've stated before, I get questions from time to time from viewers, friends of mine that watch my videos that have questions about some of the things I say, some of the terminology I use, because when I make the videos, often I will talk about things just assuming that everyone understands what I'm referring to, because I just expect everyone that's watching a gun video to be a gun guy like I am, a gun person. I don't want to be sexist there. I want to say gun person, because there are a lot of females out there that are getting firearms as well. So we'll say gun person. And so I've made a previous video answering a question, and I've tried to answer some of these questions along the way as we go, but I thought I would make another video, sort of a part two to one I made about the moon clips, because there were a couple of other questions that I got asked with regard to some of the terminology that I've used in the videos. Specifically, I'd like to make a video today discussing Centerfire versus Rimfire, because I'll throw those terms around sometimes about this is a Rimfire, this is a Centerfire, and just assume everyone knows what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, that's not the case, because there are people who are just getting into firearms and they're not versed in those terms. And the second question had to do with the difference between caliber and cartridge, because sometimes those of us who are knowledgeable about firearms will use those terms interchangeably, even though they don't actually mean the same thing. And we recognize that we're, using them interchangeably, even though we realize they're not the same thing. And, it can cause some confusion to those who are not familiar with the terms and understand how those things relate to one another. So in this video, I would like to address those two topics specifically: Centerfire versus Rimfire and caliber versus cartridge. So let's get into the video. All right, guys, the next topic that I was asked was to explain what's the difference between Rimfire and Centerfire. And I've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I throw those terms out quite often when I'm talking about things. And, sometimes people hear those terms and they don't understand what I'm talking about. So just to briefly explain that, because it's very, very simple. What's the difference between Rimfire and Centerfire? Well, here are two cartridges, both of which are 22 caliber. This is a 223, and this is a 22 long rifle. You can see on the 223, there's a little round disc looking thing in the middle of that case. You can see it here on the 45 Colt, maybe a little bit better, that it's got that round disc in the middle of the cartridge there. That round disc in the middle is a primer, which contains a priming compound. And that compound ignites when it is impacted, when there is pressure against it that is quick, and it jars it. It's kind of like tannerite, I guess you could say. Sort of like the substance that's on the end of a match when you would strike it. That priming compound there is what goes off and creates the spark that will set the powder in the cartridge off, and then obviously propel the bullet, the projectile, out of the front there. And so that primer is in the middle. It's in the center of the cartridge. And the firing pin, when it hits this primer, hits it right dead smack in the middle. At least that's the design, right? That's what it's supposed to do. It hits it right in the middle. And so the firing pin goes right for the center of the cartridge. And so it is a center fire. That's why they call them center fires. This is actually the newer technology of the two. The center fire is. The first cartridge guns were Rimfire. And the 22 long rifle is one of the few rounds still in commercial manufacture that's commercially available that's a Rimfire. Most of your Rimfire rounds went by the wayside. Centerfire pretty much replaced everything except for a few of these small rounds like 22 long rifle. But on the 22 long rifle, there is no little disc in the center. There's nothing there. Just looks like it's all solid, right? So how does the powder that's inside this cartridge get set off if there's no primer in this cartridge? Well, that's because there's no primer in the center. There's not a separate piece that you install in this case to set it off. This right here, this primer in the middle, is one that is installed in that cartridge. When I reload cartridges, I push this one out. I push the old one out. Here we got some that have been fired. Let's see here. There's one. You can see the divot in the top of it where the firing pin hit it. When I reload this case, I'll put it through a resizer that has a little pin that'll push that little primer in the center out, and I'll put a new one in it. So the primer is actually something separate from the case for a Centerfire gun, for a Centerfire cartridge. For the Rimfire, the priming compound is actually inside of the rim of this cartridge. It's packed into the cartridge itself, into the rim itself by the manufacturer. There's a process they do this with. That's why you don't reload .22 long rifle. Now, there is a process and a little system that I've seen for reloading priming compound in a Rimfire, but it doesn't look very practical, and it's not something I ever found any interest in, and so I've rarely found anyone who would even attempt that. Generally speaking, Rimfire cases, when I shoot them, they just stay out there in the grass until the ground claims them for its own. You know, these are not cases that I reuse because I can't push the primer out and put a new one in because it's inside of the rim of this case. And so when you shoot this in a Rimfire gun, the firing pin actually hits on the outside. It doesn't hit the center, it hits the outside. The firing pin is angled to hit the rim of the cartridge. That's why it's called a Rimfire, because the firing pin hits the rim to set the priming compound off. And that's why also you should not dry fire your Rimfire guns for the most part. Now, there are some they say are safe to do it, but as a general rule, a rule of thumb, it's always been thought best not to dry fire Rimfire guns because that firing pin is angled and goes toward the rim, so if it doesn't hit the rim, the next thing it's going to hit is the side of the wall of the chamber of the revolver, if it's a revolver especially. You'll end up damaging the firing pin and quite possibly, you know, even making marks in your cylinder there. So it'll damage your revolver to do that. And so that's the difference between a Centerfire and a Rimfire. And so now we'll move on to the last topic that I have for today. Okay, guys. The last topic I want to address today is a very basic one. And it's the difference between caliber and cartridge. Because often when guys who are into guns, when people who have been around firearms for a long time, when we're talking, we'll use the two terms interchangeably as though they're the same thing. We do it all the time, but they are not the same thing. And we all realize they're not the same thing. And we know what we're talking about when we do that, and it's just something that's understood, but they are not the same thing. There's a difference between caliber and cartridge. There's a difference between caliber and chambering. And so to address that, we'll just go back to these two cartridges we just looked at for the difference between Centerfire and Rimfire. Both of these are .22 caliber cartridges. They're both .22 caliber. But you can't shoot them in the same gun. They're the same caliber, but you can't interchange them. You can't take a .223 and put it in a .22 long rifle gun. I can't take this and put it in my Model 60 Marlin and shoot this out here on the range. Thankfully, because it would more than likely blow my Marlin Model 60 up. It's not designed for this kind of pressure, this kind of velocity. And by the same account, I can't take this .22 long rifle and shoot it in an AR-15, even though they're both 22 caliber. Because number one, they have two different priming systems. One's centerfire, the firing pin hits the center. One's rimfire, the firing pin hits the rim. The other is there's a big difference in velocity, a big difference in power level. I mean, look at you can see the difference between the two cartridges, right? This is a whole lot bigger. Look how wide the cartridge is right here. Whereas this one is pretty much the same diameter from, above the rim, obviously, all the way up. Much different cartridges. They're not interchangeable, but they're both 22 caliber. But this is a 223 Remington cartridge. And this is a 22 long rifle cartridge. Now, often people will say, well, what caliber is that? And I'll say, it's 223 Remington. Well, 223 Remington's not a caliber. It's a cartridge. Then why do they ask what caliber it is? Because that's just what we do. Don't ask questions. That's just what we do. Live with it, right? But we know what we're talking about. Anyone who's been into guns knows the difference if you've been around it very long. But people who are new, it can be confusing. I understand that. And in the same way with this, it's a 22 long rifle, but often we'll just talk about it being a 22. Well, there's lots of 22s, right? There's 22 long rifle, 22 short, 22 Magnum, which is 22 Winchester Magnum rimfire. There's a 22 Hornet. There's all kinds of 22s. But generally, we'll just call this a 22, and people will understand when I say 22, I'm probably talking about a 22 long rifle because this is the most common. And so there's a difference between caliber and cartridge. It's also true in larger rounds as well. These are all centerfire as well. So we're not even talking about the difference between rimfire and centerfire. These are all centerfire cartridges. This is a 45 auto or a 45 ACP. We just saw how the Smith & Wesson Governor shoots these with moon clips. This is a 45 Colt. Also able to shoot this in the Smith & Wesson Governor. This is a 454 Casull. Can't shoot this in the Smith & Wesson Governor. In fact, let me just show you here. I'll get the Governor back out here. Too big. See how it sticks out? Won't chamber. Thankfully, you would not want to fire a 454 Casull in a Smith & Wesson Governor. You just wouldn't want to do it. Too much power there. The next one here, this is a 460 Smith & Wesson. And the last one here, this one is a 4570. And so all of these are generally, for the most part, considered 45 caliber cartridges. They're all 45 caliber. Now this one right here is actually a little bit bigger caliber than these. All of these have the exact same size projectile. 0.452 for every one of these is what I've loaded in all of these. Well, this one's not one I loaded myself, but it is 0.452 caliber. This one's 0.458, so this is almost a 46 caliber, but it's still considered a 45. It's a 4570. This is called a 460 Smith & Wesson, but it's a 45 caliber. Why is that? I have no idea, because Smith & Wesson, when they designed this cartridge to go in their X-frame revolver they were making, they decided it sounded cooler to call it a 460 than to call it a 450, 452, 450, whatever. They thought 460 sounded cooler, so they made it a 460. I guess because it was more powerful than a standard 45, so it was a 46. You know, that old joke about why do you carry a 45? I carry it because they don't make a 46. Well, they do make some that are 46 or bigger now. The 500 Smith & Wesson is 50, right? It's a 50 caliber. The Desert Eagle is a 50, the 50 AE cartridge. 50 Action Express cartridge is a 50 caliber. And so Smith & Wesson decided to name it the 460, but it's a 45 caliber. So these are all basically 45 caliber rounds, 45 caliber cartridges, but they're not interchangeable. And so there's a difference between caliber and cartridge. Now, the 460 Smith & Wesson revolver will shoot all three of those. If you cut it for moon clips, it would probably shoot that one, but they haven't done it yet. I don't know if they're afraid the cutting it for moon clips would result in it losing some of the structural integrity of the cylinder, and with this big, massive, powerful 460 round, I don't know if that's what it is, but they could cut the cylinder for moon clips and shoot a 45 auto in it, but they haven't done that. The standard 460 will shoot 45 Colt, 454 Casull, and 460 Smith & Wesson. They make revolvers that will also chamber a 4570, but it's not interchangeable with these because it is a larger projectile. All right, guys, hopefully that explanation made some sense and helped out some guys who are new to the world of firearms and might not have understood some of those terminologies that were being used, and the differences between caliber and cartridge and rimfire and centerfire, and maybe going forward as I use those types of terms, it'll make a little more sense, and maybe you'll get some more out of the videos that I make if there's anything there to be gotten out of them. Hopefully some entertainment, maybe a little bit of information. But I appreciate you guys coming out. God bless you. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.